Chapter 17. A Telltale Collar. A shout of dismay went up from the children as they stared at the No Visitors sign on the locked gate of Wizard Circus. Pete gave a low whistle of disgust. "And after we drove all this way, too," he exclaimed. "Dad, we can't just turn around and leave without finding out if this is where the stolen trick dogs are." "No, we can't." Mr. Hollister's voice was firm. "We'll stay in the village overnight. In the morning, we'll make it our business to be admitted to the circus grounds." "Isn't there a knothole we can peek through and see what's going on?" Holly asked hopefully. The children searched but did not find one, though they circled the entire grounds. Once they saw a low door, just big enough for a man to crawl through, but it too was locked on the inside. The Hollisters waited for a while to see if anyone entered or left the circus, but no one did. At 6 o'clock, they gave up. As they walked back to the car, Pete said glumly, "We seem to be getting nowhere fast." Ricky had an idea. "Why don't we post a guard at the circus to see who goes in?" Pam, too, had an idea. "How about Pete and I asking for a tryout for a trapeze act? While we're waiting, we can look around." Mrs. Hollister shook her head. "If you had to go through with it, you might have to take too many chances. You're not expert enough to fool circus people." It was a disappointed little group that went to bed that evening. But by morning, the children were full of enthusiasm again to continue their sleuthing. Pete, Pam, Ricky, and Holly were up at dawn, long before their parents and Sue. Pete said, how about the four of them walking up to the circus grounds to see what was going on? Ricky and the girls liked this plan, and Pam went in to ask her mother's permission. "All right, dear," Mrs. Hollister said sleepily. "But be sure to stick together and be back here in an hour for breakfast." "We will, Mother," the girl promised, and hurried off to tell her sister and brothers that they would have to make a quick trip of it. "I guess all of the circuses will be going on tour in a little while," Pam remarked. Pete said this was all the more reason for solving the mystery of the stolen trick dogs. After the Wizard Circus moved away, it might be difficult to trace. "Oh, look," Ricky said suddenly and pointed ahead. The huge gate of the circus grounds had opened. Thinking that they might see something to help their detective work, the children began to run ahead. A truck drove through the opening, turned in the opposite direction, and sped down the road. Before the children could get a peek through the open gate, a guard closed it. The Hollisters reached the spot just in time to hear a bolt slide into place. "We're sure having bad luck," Pete said. "Well, let's do a little exploring. Maybe we can pick up some kind of clue around the fence. I saw lots of papers and things yesterday." The children began a systematic search. Ricky found an old pasteboard box, but it was empty. A few minutes later, Holly picked up a duplicate of the Wizard Circus handbill, which they had found on the plane. After this, they walked for several minutes, seeing nothing more important than discarded cartons and pieces of rags. "It's a regular dump around this circus," Holly remarked presently. Pete said the whole outfit seemed very shabby to him. "But I'd sure like to get a peek at the inside." The boy had hardly spoken when Pam gave a little squeal. She had leaned over to pick up a twisted, dust-covered mass of leather. Straightening it out, the girl suddenly realized that it was a dog's collar. The license tag was gone, and someone had tried to pry off the plate bearing the owner's name. But it was still visible. "Pete, Rick, Holly, come here quick!" Pam cried excitedly. As the others rushed over to look at her find, Pam pointed to the nameplate on the collar. To the others' complete astonishment, she read, "Zip, owned by Pam Hollister, Shoreham Road, Shoreham." For a few seconds, the children were too stunned to speak. Then Pam said, The dog napper must be here. He grabbed Zip's new collar and pulled it off when he heard him. The children decided that finding Zip's collar made it necessary for them to act at once. The girls thought they should hurry back and get Mr. Hollister, but Pete and Ricky had another idea. "I think we ought to climb the fence and find that dog napper before he runs away," Ricky declared. "All right, let's do it," Pam agreed. Their hearts beating wildly, the children discussed how to get over the fence. At last Pete offered a solution. They would go to the place where they had seen the little low door. Pam and Ricky would boost Pete up, and he would drop down on the inside. Then he would unlock the door and let the others in. The boy climbed up his brothers' and sisters' shoulders and pulled himself up. Fortunately, no one on the other side was looking in the direction of the fence, and he dropped down. In a moment, the others were inside too. As they gazed ahead, wondering which way to go, the Hollisters decided that this was indeed a shabby circus. They could not understand how the owner could afford to pay higher salaries to his performers than Peppo could. Going forward cautiously, the children approached a rickety circus wagon. Outside of it, a washing was strung from the door to a nearby pole. Garments on it flapped limply in the slight morning breeze. Suddenly, Pete grabbed at Pam's arm. "See that shirt on the line," he whispered. It was a white shirt with blue zigzag stripes. The center of the shirt had been torn. "The dog napper's shirt," Pam said in a low voice. "He is here." "What do we do?" Holly asked nervously. "Maybe we'd better go get Daddy now." "Just a minute," Pete said. He was looking toward a strange sight in front of a faded brown canvas tent. "See that man?" The others looked. The fellow was tall and thin, and at this moment he was swallowing a shining sword. "Oh, goodness," Pam whispered. Holly was fearful the man would hurt himself, but as they gazed in fascination, he withdrew the sword and laid it on the chair in front of the tent. Pam had been thinking. Now she said, "Even if he is a sword swallower, I think he looks nice. Maybe he'll tell us about the person who lives in this wagon." The others agreed, and they hurried to speak to him. On the way, Pam whispered to Pete, "Maybe he's the sword swallower who came from Peppo's circus, the one the bus driver told us about." Her brother nodded, just as the man turned his head. He smiled at the children. "Good morning," he said. "You must be the early birds one hears so much about." Pam introduced the Hollisters and said they were not part of the circus. They were passing through town and had come to look around. The sword swallower lifted his eyebrows, saying he thought no visitors were allowed. The children looked at one another, but did not explain. Quickly, Pete said, "Are you the sword swallower who was with the Sunshine Circus?" The man nodded glumly. "We've heard from Rita and Kit how wonderful you are. They say Peppo will never find another sword swallower like you," Pam said. The man brightened, and he remarked briskly, "Of course not." After a moment, he said, "Peppo's a fine fellow. How's he doing?" "Poor Peppo," Pam said sadly. "He's not doing well at all. His best performers are leaving Sunshine." "I'm sorry already that I left Peppo," the sword swallower said. As he started to go inside his tent, Pete asked, "Can you tell us who lives in that wagon over there where the wash is on the line?" "Certainly," came the reply. "Professor Mars lives there. He's a great dog trainer, so he says. He has an act with trick poodles, which I have not yet had the pleasure of seeing." He went inside. The children could hardly contain themselves. As each wondered what their next move should be, the door of Professor Mars' wagon opened. A man came out and stood on the top step. He was looking the other way, so he was unable to see the Hollisters. "He's the dog napper," Ricky whispered excitedly. As the children shrank out of sight behind a packing case to watch him, The professor ran down the steps of his wagon and across the grass to a small enclosure surrounded by a high wire fence. A sound of frenzied barking commenced. At once the children followed it. Opening the gate in the fence with a key, the man went in and unlocked the door of a large doghouse. Inside were 4 snow-white French poodles. They retreated to growl and bark at their keeper. "They're the stolen poodles," Pam said tensely. "And see how badly he treats them," Pete exclaimed with wrath. "He's hitting them with that rope." Pam started from their hiding place, determined to save the dogs from further cruelty. But her brother held her back. "If we give ourselves away, we'll never catch him," Pete warned. "We'd better run now and get Dad to bring the police." The children backed up and, trying not to be noticed, hurried along past the various tents and wagons. They reached the fence out of breath. Pete unlocked the door, and first Holly, then Pam scrambled through and started running down the road. As Ricky was about to follow, a heavy hand was laid upon his shoulder. Another grabbed Pete by the arm. "No, you don't," said a cruel voice, as both boys were yanked backward and the door locked. "You Hollister kids have bothered me for the last time." Professor Mars. He was holding Pete while the other man was grasping Ricky. As the boys opened their mouths to yell for help, the men's hands were clapped over them. "One word out of you two and you'll be sorry," the dog napper said. "Get moving to my wagon." Ricky was quivering with fear, and tears started to form in his eyes. When Pete saw this, he put an arm around his brother's shoulder. "It's all right, Rick," he whispered. "We'll get out of here some way. Come on, we'd better do as they say for now." The brothers marched on ahead, with the 2 men stalking along behind them.